as an everlasting righteousness, and your word is truth. Kyrie te mo nixis que tostoma mo evangelion in sinso. All right.
So I think we start after my question.
Yeah.
Okay, 3, 2, 1, action.
A nation mourns a hero. We've all seen the headlines, the vigils, the public outcry. But what if the grief you're seeing isn't entirely real? What if it's a contagious delusion that could lead to a civil war? What if it isn't mourning, but a meticulously planned political operation? What if the emotions you're feeling are being weaponized to justify a cause? This isn't a wake, it's a deception.
When we see the public response to something like this on social media, there is so much emotional energy. It feels different, almost like a social mania. What's really happening here, and why does this public grieving feel so intense?
You've seen the outpouring of grief online, the tributes, the outrage, the sadness. It feels raw, personal, and real. But what if I told you that what you're seeing isn't just grief? What if it's the raw emotion of a nation being harnessed, weaponized, and manipulated? What if the collective sadness you're feeling is the key ingredient in, well, a political operation? The delusions of the crowd can become a contagion, and that's why they're so powerful. Why has a seemingly personal tragedy actually been a masterclass in, well, modern propaganda? Because this isn't a wake, it's a warning.
You've said this isn't new. It's an old playbook. Can you walk us through some of the most powerful historical and contemporary examples of a death being used to create a political martyr?
Contemporary examples? Yeah. Well, you think this is new? This kind of political manipulation is a modern invention? No. This is an old playbook, and it's a playbook born out of the chaos of the world after the Protestant Reformation, which gave birth to the very framework for the heresy of Christian nationalism we see today. We see this tactic used time and again to create a martyr. They took the death of a radical named Jean-Paul Marat during the French Revolution, and they used it to justify the reign of terror. They took a minor Nazi party member named Horst Wessel, and they created a blood witness to rally an entire nation. They used the death of Ernst von Rath as the pretext for the violence of Kristallnacht. They all used the human life as fuel for a political fire. And now we're seeing it again, right in front of us. This is what the madness of crowds looks like in the digital age. The suspect in the Kirk killing was found through his online chat history, a chilling digital trail of radicalization that was part of this very same social mania.
And this is where we have to ask ourselves, what is the spiritual error here?
What's the spiritual error? They tell you that the highest virtue is courage. That's a pagan idea from a pre-Christian philosopher, namely Aristotle. But our Lord tells us that the highest virtue is self-sacrificial love, as he showed us on the cross. What they call courage, when taken apart from love, can become a virtue of the self. What our faith teaches us is to renounce the self for the sake of the other. This is a modern example of that pagan idea of virtue in action, I'm afraid. We saw it in the news when FBI Director Kash Patel, in his tribute to Charlie Kirk, said, "Get this, I'll see you in Valhalla." Valhalla? Really? This is not a Christian concept. It's a hall in Norse mythology, a paradise for warriors who have died in battle. This is the pagan idea of virtue, a glorious death in battle. And I'm afraid it's also a profound spiritual deception. And this paganism extends beyond the idea of virtue to a godless form of grief. In this godless grief, there's no hope of divine reconciliation. There's only a blood debt to be repaid, a demand for vengeance that leads to more violence. This isn't martyrdom. This is a counterfeit. The saints we venerate lived lives of holiness. They lived lives of asceticism and renounced the world. This is monetized. From the podcasters to the politicians, millions are being made. It has been said that the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. The honor being given to him, to Charlie, is a secular political elevation, not a spiritual one. This populist movement and Christian nationalism are, well, a malformed faith, a heresy. It's a worldly ideology dressed in the cloak of religion.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Dr. Deep State. The title of our show today is the Charlie Kirk PSYOP and the weaponization of grief, which was one of the themes that was just spoken about. So I would like to weigh in on the topic, and I've had obviously some time to think about it. And indeed, down in our Dr. Deep State community, we have been discussing it. So I'd like to share with you the ideas mostly of our community, and I will add some of my own. So one of the questions we dealt with was the whodunit question. And after further reflection, I realized it's really not the right question. But we have to see and think exactly what is entailed in this operation and respond accordingly. So I'll give you some of the quick recaps of the summation of the week's thoughts, which are that this is a highly demonically charged psyop. And I'll go over that with you. And the takeaway of this is to keep focused on Christ, to forgive others, and just to have faith and keep on going, because there's a new level of chaos and confusion in the world. And that's only going to continue with this as an entry point for other psyops coming in the very near future. So that's a bit of the takeaway. So I'll go over a bit of what we did this week, and I want to share with you some of the great ideas from our Dr. Deep State community. On Monday, we talked about it. We began the show thinking about, again, we do 3 shows a week there: Metaverse Monday, Connect the Dots Wednesday, and Memory Hole Friday. And on Monday, we looked over a chapter of the Metaverse, again, still dealing with St. Augustine. And we went over how there is a weaponization to get the mind from reality to anti-reality, from the city of God to the city of man, from the church to the anti-church. And we went over the techniques of how to copy, taking elements of an original and tweaking it. And once we remove it from the original, we remove it from the essence, and it does open up increasingly to ethereal forces as it becomes more removed from being. And that's our cataphatic understanding of being, that our God that we worship is all good, all true, and all beautiful. And the further you go away from God, the deprivation of God is the very source of evil. So copies upon copies become very damaged. And this PSYOP has many flavors of that. So one of the themes here that was talked about, and maybe we'll discuss it again, I married two ideas. One was from Michael Hoffman's book from 1992, Secret Societies and Psychological Warfare, where he talks about the lone nut. And when people consent to it, don't push back, one falls into a state of abula, apathy, and indifference, so that one cannot properly defend themselves. And that, I think, is why he says it's chosen over and over, from the ancient world to the present. And I tied that to Rene Girard's idea of the scapegoat. And he said, deep inside the complexities of the cosmos, for whatever reason in this fallen world, it's everywhere and all the time. And he uncovered the secret hidden matrix of the oligarchs was to exploit this feature, that society finds relief from the sacrifice of an innocent victim. And this event seems to have all those hallmarks of both of those. So again, if you're interested, the links are in the description for that. On Wednesday, and again, this is the movement of our visual economy, sort of, as the priest said there, it's a counterfeiting of reality. On Wednesday, we connected dots. Generally on Wednesdays, we connected the dots with events going around the world. The show was between 2.5 and 3 hours long. And what I did is I explained to the locals community, we wanted to do an experiment and look at the three dominant perspectives that seem to be taken on how to perceive this event. And we wanted to do an experiment. I would present the three different perspectives, just loosely. One is the lone nut. One is somebody close to him did it. And one of them is that he is on an island someplace. And there's a lot of division over this. I believe the main weaponization going on with the grief is we're grieving the fact that the world that we thought was kind of normal is slipping away. The predictability and stability that we thought was around us seems to be slipping away. And in place, we have all kinds of events, each of which is laced with levels of contradiction, sowing division, and that is part, I think, of what's going here. One of the takeaways is that being wed to any one of these positions is highly problematic. And the takeaway from this is to not engage this psyop. And we came about that, and I'll read the comments by each person, not just because that's part of the triggering, going from reality to the counterfeit, is an inability to critically look at the counterfeit. And so we looked at all three positions and tried to say what seems to be valid in each one. And really the question should not be who, but that this is truly diabolical. The nature of this has dark energies attached to it. And that was the general takeaway. And I'll read some of the comments for you. But that was an exciting show, endless great comments, and I'll share some of them with you today. Friday, we continued and we went into the interwar periods and the great Soviet deception, and we talked about that. Next week on Memory Hole Friday, we're going to talk and bring in the idea of the mystery of iniquity, and that's a book by Father Kramer. The following week, we're going to be looking at Tavistock and the techniques they use to create this diabolical deception going on increasingly, as we say, in the empire of spectacle, because we see that one event can have this contagion around the world almost instantaneously. So we talked a few weeks ago on Memory Hole Friday about Laurel Canyon and how that foothold into the popular culture took hold, and now we're going to hook it into the Tavistock piece, including even popular music and so forth. So that is what we're up to over there. And the question then about who killed Charlie in these three veins, we'll go over briefly, but I'm going to assume some people have already had some exposure to all three of these views. What I have found is that the view that Charlie's on an island, it's not discussed on the mainstream or in the alternative controlled network. And it's an important view to consider, but it's also problematic. And I did do this video yesterday, and then I found out the priest and a couple other videos, the sound didn't show up, and I slept on it. And it's probably just as well. I included a lot of information that more than anything, this platform hates that perspective. And there was a sort of YouTube apocalypse in 2018, and those were the first types of videos. They do not want that perspective shared. So we wanted to sit and boldly look at all three perspectives. And then our takeaway, again, is that this is not something you want to engage. But I'll give you the details of our process and some of the comments. But in terms of the law enforcement, media, the powers that be, that it really isn't a who question in terms of who did it, but he's pretty much been tried in the public eye. So the question is, why? Getting immediately into the psychosis and the pathology of the killer immediately. And that's part of the deception of moving you from one to get you away from the critical thinking, looking at the evidence, looking at the counter evidence, looking back at this, deliberating in the process that we took. And it's to get you into the pathology and engaging in the pathology immediately. And again, part of the feature of the empire of spectacle is that we put images over facts. And that's one of the takeaways with our conversation. So why did he do it was the general takeaway. So who killed Charlie Kirk? In Rene Girard's estimation, that society, when it clicks from sort of one frame of reference to another, sometimes that's called the killing of the king ritual, an innocent victim is used, and that's been exploited throughout the ages. Christ came, says Girard, to become the perfect sacrificial victim, the innocent lamb being slaughtered. And he did that to become the ultimate sacrificial lamb that we should, as we were talking about last week, train our gaze upon. He also became the perfect spectacle so that we do not have to gaze upon the spectacle of the world and the psyops of the world and the whodunits of the world, because Christ wants his body to be the true spectacle. So that's kind of pulling them together. And the object of these psyops is really to uncrown Christ in that regard. So what we did is we thought about the burden of proof. First of all, I think generally nobody went in our groups for the lone nut. So the two other perspectives, I understand on the Dr. Deep State Telegram, there's a lot of tension over this. And again, that's part of the weaponization, this division and this idea to, as the priest said, to find a fleshly solution to this particular problem that that has been foisted upon us. So in the burden of proof, there are cases of absolute certainty that I think people can come upon. Certainly jurors do that every day. In my own estimation, with Trump in the ear, if someone were to forensically examine that to this day, I have a sense of absolute certainty, could be wrong, but that there would be no way you could determine any damage to it. And that's also based on all of the facts that I looked up about the event. So this event that we're talking about with Kirk is not that way. And what we found out is that many great minds that have been paramedics, snipers, military, law enforcement, seen blood, come up with two entirely different positions. And when we have that going, we have the troublesome situation of this sort of mimetic division that's going on. So again, our takeaway before I get to any of it, it's best not to overly engage this. And what we're going to see when we look at this event, it's deliberately designed to have multiple errors and multiple rabbit holes going in each of the perspective, which means that this is exactly how it was designed for this type of division and confusion. So again, just a loose standard, so you have some reference point when I'm reading our community's comments, is that in a civil case, it's the preponderance of evidence that it's more likely than not. And in a criminal case where the loss of liberty is an issue, it's beyond any reasonable doubt that 12 jurors, 12 to 16, come up with a unanimous decision that there is no doubt that this is what went down. So that's the standard that we used, and we tried to kind of put the emotions and any preformed thoughts to the side, and we wanted to see what the results were of this. So one of the takeaways we should consider here is, again, before we continue, is, was this designed with a particular outcome? And what we're going to see over and over, the hate speech legislation, the firing of endless people, the revisiting of what journalists can and cannot say, and ultimately the impending implementation of anti-Semitic laws, which again, both of my books are in the description section, and we always delve into these ideas. But the concluding chapter of the Metaverse is when Christ becomes hate speech. So whenever there's the tension, it's driven forward into that direction. So as they use the left, now they're using the right to move this operation forward in that direction. So the outcome almost immediately was from this, as you probably know by now. So the new hate speech, new censorship now coming from the right. And I'm going to begin reading some comments. This one is from Henry. There are so many, I cannot get to all of them at all, and they're all so very thoughtful. Henry says to us, years ago, I looked into the JFK ritual, even some articles by Michael Mathis. Eventually, I came to the conclusion that it's impossible to know what happened. And before I continue, there was a video by Elon Musk sounding very robotic, I guess preparing us for the next PSYOP. He seems to engage or be promoting a rapture position, just as there's talk about aliens again. And so I think when people kind of enter this PSYOP, it's an entryway to the other ones, I suspect. So I came to the conclusion that it's impossible to know what's happened, whether both deaths of the Hollywood-connected Kennedy brothers were faked or not. However, the question about who's behind the spectacle and if it's answerable remains unanswerable. The best pieces of evidence to determine the culprit are the consequences, chaos, division, changes in law, the magical effect in the zeitgeist, all of the manufactured changes that the synagogue creates. So I'd say we know who is behind the CK event. They did it. However, the details, whether CK was in on it, I feel we'll never know. Years ago, I found a book written in 1970 by Gene Youngblood. It's called Expanded Cinema. The name refers to the idea of a unified global mind that the cybernetic screen is creating, and that the writer of the book was one of them. One of Youngblood's mentor, Heinz von Forster, one of the pioneers of cybernetics. In the book, there's a chapter called 2001, The New Nostalgia. What he writes about, although from a secular perspective, secular and manipulative perspective, connects directly with what Dr. Haugen, your work, and with events of the age of deception. As a response to this CK spectacle, I'd like to quote the most interesting part of the chapter. Years ago, we find, this is a quote from the book, we find, moreover, that the new nostalgia is a symptom of the death of history. The more we learn about the present, about humanity's perception and interpretation of the present, the more suspect history becomes. When Buckminster Fuller remarks that our most polluted resource is the tactical information, i.e. news, to which humanity spontaneously reflects. He echoed Hermann Hesse's view that history's third dimension is always fiction. The present has discredited the past, while the history of the present is recorded by machines, not written by men, and is thus out of our hands a man-made phenomenon. The computer, says McCullen, abolishes the human past by making it entirely present. We don't remember the assassination of JFK because we never experienced it directly in the first place. For millions of people who are not actually present in Dallas, Kennedy's death exists only in the endless technological sustained present. We remember it in the same way that we first knew it, through the media. And we can experience it again each time the videotapes are played. Since we see and hear and feel only the conditioning of our own memory, a great flood of nostalgia is generated when technology erases the past, and within it, our self-image. I think that excerpt explains something about what is intended to happen to us alchemically, globally, via the electronic media spectacle of speed. Our sense of reality and time is constantly undermined, leaving us nostalgic for a reality of God. It perfectly goes with the weaponization of grief. So thank you for that one, Henry. Sandy, thank you for the comprehensive podcast on the Charlie Kirk operation. I never listened to Charlie, but knew of his group Turning Point for the younger generation. This op is so similar to JFK. I was 9 in 1963. I don't know who murdered him or if he's alive. Regardless, he is legally defined as a civil death. A presumption of death to the general public. He is dead. I don't believe the patsy is guilty. It was this is high-tech warfare, 5th and 6th generation, invisible weaponry. Who benefits? The state in the Middle East has gotten away with starting all of the world wars, Middle East coups, 9/11, JFK, and on and on. The country in the Middle East is capable of anything, no matter how evil or extreme, like genociding and starving Palestinians on live video. They, the usual suspects, and the ADL have been expressing deep concerns over surveys which clearly show the younger generation doesn't support them for the first time in history. Jonathan Greenblatt has been testifying in Congress and publicly about the rise of anti-Sem and the decline of the support of the younger generation. To complete their greater Middle East project, the New Jerusalem in Ukraine and WW3, we need American boots on the ground. The younger generation sees them clearly due to the internet, which we boomers didn't have. Charlie was scared of the country over there, wealthy network. He spoke against them and had guests on that they did not approve. So he needed to replace them immediately, no matter how fake it looks. When you bring that demon into Ben Shapiro into the picture, taking over the show, it becomes complete. Approximately 81.8 million people in the US age 15 to 40, based on recent census data, no longer believe. The country over there, which controlled Turning Point to convince all of these people to support them as their demonic takeover, isn't complete. The Jays bought TikTok via the investment group tied to Larry Ellison and Son. They have ADL, IDL supervising all social media through X, very open. It too is censored if anti-hate, anti-Sem ledge are passed and enforced. Everyone's activity online will be in their social credit database. It's noteworthy Charlie was shot in the neck and throat. That's a Masonic hit and ritual. Masons are warned they will be killed in that fashion, and if they deceive their oath. It is a warning then that you have, and I'll move on from that one. There's much more, and there's so much more. So once we get off the idea that there was a lone person, the official lone nut narrative, we move into a position where others are involved. So like the Kennedy case, if more than one person's involved, it's a coordinated event, then we have the C word comes into play. And the C word is simply that multiple actors were working in coordination. So a little bit about these two events, and I'll just maybe add a little bit more as we're going along. There's a bunch of great evidence that he turned against them and they bumped him off, and they were involved in it. And I'm not even going to show pictures today of the scene because you've seen it very much. So you can picture it in your own head. With the gunman scenario, what I'm finding is a lot of people that have a background in law enforcement, former FBI and so forth, are looking at it. And at first it's the gunman to the side that seems to be doing it. Then it's the person in the baseball cap next to him. And then it's the person behind the rails. And then there's a person literally holding up a cell phone with a laser coming in on the back of the head. Now the newest one is somebody in the front. And so I've got to sense that that's on purpose. And it sort of echoes of JFK, that I think many elements were involved with it for that purpose. The Cubans, did they do it? Did the Russians do it? Did the mafia do it? Did the state over there do it? And so I think that's part of the diabolical deception. And I think at one point, what we're getting to is with our guests, we have two different views that we're going to be presenting here. One says that she tends to believe in this idea that it was real. And I do think it's a legitimate idea. I don't think it equates with a no-brainer like the Trump in the ear, in my opinion, looking at the evidence. But people that closely looked at the evidence, this is the point. People well-meaning that didn't have any emotion on the line. And I've seen that directly in my own life. And so that's one side of the argument, and that's being sort of pushed by the Tucker Carlson, the Candace Owens, the Nick Fuentes, and they're sort of on the far side of the larger alternative media saying who benefits, the usual suspects. And now I will from time to time hit upon the other perspective and say why there is something there as well. But before I continue, it's hard to avoid the fact that elements were put into the psyop that were straight up demonic, which is letting you know the very second day that a book had been published on the event before the event. And that's out there. And that's got to be part of achieving an ultimate agenda. And I think the ultimate agenda requires us to be attached to this monster. And so sometimes you have to look at something, hopefully rationally, in order to say, I'm not attaching my emotions to that. And so we have elements here that make it pretty hard to think that some lone nut acted spontaneously and that this must have been some kind of coordinated event. And there's even the idea that was out there in advance that was used through humor. Lumen, evil can speak well, dress well, and even call itself Catholic. If you've had not personal experience with a psychopath, you may enjoy the new Colbert Report, which covers the topic. Psychopaths working in coordination is what we are seeing. It is the most likely combination of all the options offered. I think they worked every angle, deception mixed with reality, to maximize the distraction, divide, and confuse. Whether this man is alive or dead is ultimately irrelevant. Unless he was your personal acquaintance, our prayers are the same either way. And we need to keep our eyes on the schemes being perpetrated while everyone is mesmerized. Dr. Haugen listed only a few of the things now disappeared and those coming into law as a result of this event. Every image we see is curated and every soundbite scripted. It was a choreographed show, K-Fab par excellence. Side note, does anyone else see like that we are watching an addition to the next big act? I have never seen so much overacting. And we'll talk briefly about the overacting, but he mentioned the K-Fab, and I probably will hit that next week down in locals, links in the description section. That there were no doubt elements of mixed reality involved in order to achieve a collective psychosis. Chris, I would like to say if we adhere to the appropriate burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt, then we cannot convict anyone. This is for obvious reasons. The only concrete suspect is the lone shooter, in quotes, who we should agree is not the only perpetrator, given the massive inadequacy of the tiresome theory. All of the other suspects are either groups, Mossad, FBI, or individuals who have not been credibly linked with sufficient evidence. The handlers, the signalers, for example. Obviously, a criminal trial is not a class action lawsuit, and we do not possess enough evidence to prosecute multiple perpetrators, at least not yet. Stay tuned. Perhaps if God wills it, then more conclusive evidence will emerge. Here's a wild question. If the Charlie is alive thesis is true, then what might happen if, unlike all past perpetrators of the similar spectacle, i.e. Hitler in Argentina, Charlie were to reappear in public somehow? To my knowledge, this has never happened in any fake victim actor case. However, what might that look like? I haven't heard anyone hoist this theory. It could involve something much more massive than we've ever seen. This is just a wild guess, but perhaps we might review this passage in St. John's Apocalypse of chapter 13. And I saw one of the heads, and it were slain to death, and his head wound was healed, and all of the earth was in admiration of the beast. And they adored the dragon, which gave power to the beast. And they adored the beast, saying, who is like the beast? And who shall be able to fight with him? The only thing worse than fake death might be a fake resurrection, followed by the implications of biblical proportions. This is, however, just a wild guess, and only my conclusive and not my conclusive position. Either way, go to confession often and do not believe anything from the TV or the mainstream at all costs. That was a great one, Chris. They're all great. They're all great. And I didn't even talk much because I think you've heard about the inconsistencies from the lack of surveillance cameras to the lone nut getting up, changing clothes, no cameras, gun coming down, no gun in the woods. And that's only the opening. They get crazier and crazier. But one of the things that is really highlighted right now that I'd like to get into with the Charlie on an Island thing is the crime scene apparently wasn't a crime scene because there was no tape, there was no crime scene. The equipment was taken down immediately. And soon after, they're now putting concrete all over what should have been a major crime scene. They should have been investigating for perhaps days. And now we see right over, if this doesn't get crazy enough, right over where he was standing is a trap door. You can't make this stuff up. If you want that perspective, there's just a little bit more going for you right there. So what I have in the screen right here, this is probably worth just blowing up a little bit. He said it. This is one of the things that he said that he'll probably actually do and accomplish. When I bring my second term to as president, I will sign into law those criminalizing, which you get soon the word hate is going to be conflated with this. And there's already talks of, we see people, 7 people being fired from television, chat shows and whatnot, just for having an opinion on this situation. And that the grief and anger of the other side is saying, yeah, bring it on. And it's, of course, problem, reaction, solution, bringing on this final outcome here. And again, when you think about, we talked about this with the Red Symphony and the parallels to the situation between warriors with what we call the heirs of Russia. And yes, it became illegal to criticize the folks in control. And then we have another outcome from this event over here. I'm pleased to inform U.S. patriots that I'm designing so he's going to go after them. He's going to make things right. They're going to be called the terrorists now. Using this event for multiple purposes. And again, the contradictions in all 3 of these positions. And that leads, as scripture says, to a double-mindedness. And it's a classic technique in the killing of the king, because during this event, there's a usurpation of the former stability or the former reality. The oligarchs come and interject their message. So many have connected that modern equivalency of that to the Kennedy phenomenon. And we can see elements of that in play here. So at one time, as this Netanyahu's on the screen, if you're just listening, he's owning it, right? And Tucker Carlson got after him for owning it, thinking that's in bad form. But yet back home, he's being demonized. So you have this massive contradiction here in the response to the likely perpetrators. Another comment. My view on Charles Kirk, as some days have passed since, I kept myself away from too much news. Firstly, I only heard the big news on the day, and I turned up at my office. One of the people at work said, "Did you hear about the Charlie Kirk situation?" The same day, I checked our local news and saw some comments made by people from our group. That would be the Dr. Deep State Locals community. After which I made the comments from our locals page. This is a 50-50, but the point is beyond it. I said to myself, separate the noise from the signal. Let me say it again. Separate the noise from the signal. One of my good friends that I think is waking up sent me a text on the same day. Do you think the Jays got him? My usual reaction would be to text back and fire. But for some reason, I did not. This is now 7 days ago. In the last 2 days, I watched a few so-called videos where apparently Charlie is giving signs that he is becoming Catholic and that he is turning against Israel. Then I checked my wife's video and his dead body, and also a few others, people saying a few other conspiracy videos. And finally, our good doctor, I think that's me, has posted this video. I still need to watch part 2. I posted a 2-part video, but let me write this. We need to take 4 or 5 steps back and look at this from far away. If you are able to orchestrate the French Revolution, World War I, World War II, Vatican II, white smoke turning black, Matthew 24:2, we still bend to the wall. JFK, 9/11, Trump ear, Gaza wipeout. This event equals Charlie Kirk was a walk on the park. The effect that this brought to the world scene is huge. I would call it a preface to WW3. Yep, that is correct. WW3. The SOS is swinging that pendulum big time. Let's go to London and big turnout of English people and other events that are popping up across Europe with a right-wing nationalist movement, even including 500,000 Croatians at a concert. I was in Europe 2 months ago. Everyone is still talking about possible war. All of this is connecting to concrete. This is connected to create this movement and to create momentum where for the people of Europe will be ready to fight Russia, and where Russia will walk over Rome, the third secret of Fatima will be fulfilled. P.S. I did not want to waste too much time writing about this, but about how the movie cast for blockbusters Who Killed Charlie is part of the same cast that mostly walks around Corporal Steve Bannon, who promotes them. Also, for people that think that this is real, that is fine with me. As I said, separate the noise from the signal. So that was the takeaway from our general community, very beyond cordial to one another, because I think we entered it in this format, and the usual responses are forgive others, go to confession, keep your eyes on Jesus. But as far as this idea goes, one of the reference points we had was Gemma over in Ireland. And she is one of the Catholic influencers that goes the full direction, which we can't develop here. But one of the advantages of doing an op this way is you're going to get the perfect optic because everybody's in on it. So the desired result in the minds of people there's not going to be any missing. It's going to hit. And that's hard for a lot of people to get their heads around. And we had sort of a split on that here. But part of what needs to be understood here, and this is why this gets tricky, that just like in the Kennedy case, with the Kennedys, not only with the Cubans and the Russians and the mafia after him, but when you say, why was he bumped? It was because he's going to take down the central bank, because he was going to make them register as a special interest group, because they had nukes. And we could even go on and on. So there's multiple reasons that seem to be interjected here. He went on live video for 2 weeks. His conversation with Ben Shapiro, his handler had given him a large amount of money that he turned down. So in this perspective, where he was in on it, the idea here would be that that was part of this long-term casting. And so that the wife has no problem that his show was hijacked from Benny and the gang. And if you've never gotten your head around that, I think most people that I suspect, definitely in the deep state community, Dr. Deep State community and on locals, everybody's familiar with this perspective. I don't know who's watching me on YouTube, but it's not something that's even allowed to be spoken about on this platform. And I do think it occurs sometimes, just like the gender inversion and people marrying a dude in high places. I do think that happens. How much is really the question. Is it all the time, or is it just a few cases of it? Michael Obama kind of thing, that's the question. And I think sometimes to withdraw from something, to not give your attention and devotion to a topic, you do need to engage it to some extent. It's how we do it. And, I think we do need to identify, discern, and detach. And I think this method, the experiment, really said when you have an open mind to looking at all three possibilities, the end is the same, is that there's definitely a diabolical disorientation that was interjected into the psyop itself. My view on Charlie Kirk, as some days have passed since, I keep myself away from too much news. Okay, sorry, French Revolution, separate the sound from the noise. Okay, morning calm. The fakery to me seems very confusing, though I do appreciate you're trying to give us the other side of its due. A call for an uprising makes a great case with his videos. What with the squib, blood squib, the wife, the crisis actors, yada, yada, yada. And most recently with Candace, an op herself, with her "I'm a Mason" comment. Commenters here note the absence of an ambulance, among other things. Do I think Mossad Intel is pulling the strings? Yes. But I do think C. Kirk, whom I never followed, was shot. The technocratic agenda is well on its way to locking everyone in place, and the divide is on cue. Love the wife's dangling of her rosary. Nice touch. Or the VP's wife turning to the camera. Her role in this revenge is set now. This entire stage production, cue the hooded Mossad figure in the video, has hit its target. Gemma is all right, and her takes on EMJ is sound. Followed Max for a while, but I don't think ultimately, having seen him for years, that is truly passed the smell test. And that would be Max Blumenthal. And the idea of saying that Charlie had a lot of threats coming his way. So that's from the gray zone. And they're probably one of the more legitimate broadcasters that began to present that view that they were out for him. And is that part of the op to get you, like, literally, in the case of JFK, the last place you were supposed to go was Mossad. You could put it on a list, but it had to be included with the other cluster F kind of phenomenon. In this case, it's put there. Is it just because they can't control this, all the information anymore? Or is it part of the op? Or ultimately, do we really want to disengage from this whole thing? And I would say, just because someone's going through a sacred ceremony in pajamas on a checkered floor doesn't necessarily mean it's not real. Just because somebody's holding up the hand signs doesn't necessarily. And who knows? People could change their mind and go against the powers that be. We really don't know. JQ Public, good breakdown, but after watching snipers break it down and seeing the shot from all angles dozens of times, I just don't have any room for the notion that it was fake. Certainly it is not the story of the government is giving us, of the people over in the Middle East written all over it, but I'm convinced he was shot. And many people I deeply respect vehemently hold that position. Christina's journey, I'm so black-pilled that I think it's all fake. But I admit that it looked like a real death when I first saw it, because the way his hands curled down as he flew back. That's what happens with severe damage to the brain and nerves. I suppose it could be faked, but seems he would have to have had practiced a long time, and who would want to do that? Either way, murdered or not, it is producing the same outcome. On the other note, I was looking through a big box of baby photos to find my baptism pictures to show the deacon where I started OCIA when I came upon a photo of the death of Marriott. I don't know how I even obtained it, but when the photo popped into the show, I had an instant recognition. That was the photo that you saw at the beginning of The Priest. That was a facilitating firing event for the French Revolution. I had an instant recognition that I have that photo. I never knew anything about him before. Now I do. A secular martyr and an antique propagandist art. Never knew, and nothing new under the sun. Crazy. Sebastian, I believe a better analysis on the subject than Gemma is Laura Woods, the thinking housewife, who is more moderate, scientific, careful, and IMHO, wise, in that she keeps things with a proper Catholic perspective. Miss Doherty has gone too far, from believing everything to believing nothing, too fast, too quick, a transformation. I can't trust her judgment. The character known as Charlie Kirk was slated for this role probably years ago. He was no martyr and he was no Christian. He was a spokesman for the Messianic Talmud with its radical supremacy and once saved, always saved heresies. Lucas, in the midst, anywhere on the white shirt or white tarp behind him, heartstring pulling event staged to make a new JFK event for the younger crowd, who weren't even born during 9/11. So they had no era defining trauma-based mind control event like that. Lone gunman suspect found 33 hours later. Imagine that. They also get the anti-Israel crowd opened in with the alternative narrative. But I've seen no evidence this character was turning on his masters. Seems to be a complete cutout. We live in a Hollywood movie set. If they spotlight it, it's their creation. And if you know their name, they're in the game. Please note the Kabbalistic Masonic hand gestures and the red bracelet resonant, although not a string, of the bracelet Kabbalistic Tucker Carlson and other creeps wear. I don't believe he was shot. The blood should have been bright red from the art. This is Dean, by the way. I don't believe he was shot. The blood should have been bright red from the artery. The entry wound would have been small with a cloud-like crimson mist and gore, spraying out the back all over the backdrop, especially with a hollow point. I have a 30-06, and it is devastating. It is a devastating round for a soft target. Like Sandy Crook, there was no ambulance. The body was secretly hauled away. I did enjoy the wax hands in the coffin, though, deliberately making fun and demonstrating the effectiveness of those under the strong delusion. This is the latest guy in the front. And I've got to believe that all of these people between the hand signs and early on, it looked like the guy under the arm did it, then the guy on behind it did it, then the guy under the rails did it, and this one. This has got to be by design for this perspective. And we know from JFK how many books have been written over the last 62 years. How many? The Cubans, the Jesuits, the mafia. And I think, if nothing else, it becomes very distracting. Rick, I'm convinced that the actor, agent, persona Charlie Cook was killed and that the man playing those roles, whatever his real name, is still alive. The orchestration of this psyop wants everyone to believe there was a sniper. Firstly, the man standing behind him were doing the hand signals because the orchestrators knew the video would be scrutinized, and to give credence to the sniper killing, say, CK. Secondly, CK's shirt had the squib device used for decades in Hollywood under his shirt for the spectators there who were not part of the operation. Lastly, the blood from his neck, that was too much blood, was added post-edit CGI. CK acting like he was killed instantly is not credible. As the retired LEO, the crime scene was not secured and taken apart immediately, which is a considerable factor that tends to give credence that KC is still alive. And this is another psychological operation and Masonic gesture. Miles Mathis, breakdown, the endless 33s, the Valhalla, it's all in there. And so that's a little bit from our deep state community. Once again, the links are in the description. The two books, Seeing Through the Singularity and the Metaverse, are also links in the description. And God willing, my book will be out before the end of the year. And that is the Saints of the Apocalypse, Escaping the Empire of Spectacle, who I open up to the great saints, all the way from St. Stephen to St. Colby, including our Blessed Mother and Fatima. And what are they talking about right now? How do we escape this empire of spectacle and the contagion therein? And I believe that they have the best advice going in terms of how to approach this. And one of the things I argue is to identify the enmity and act in terms of the mind of the church and our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. So this has been Dr. Deep State. Thank you very much for joining me.